except for that Gabrielle, that one from Arizona, that senator, her husband's a she didn't deserve that. He just crazy people.
Good evening. This is the Planning and Zoning Commission for the Municipality of Anchorage. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Dean? Here. Mr. Ferguson?
Here.
Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Mr. Spring?
Here.
Mr. Strike?
Here.
Ms. Barker? Here. Mr. Walker?
Here.
Mr. Sporhays?
Here.
Mr. Kange?
Here.
Thank you.
Mr. Kange, will you please do disclosures?
Thank you. Through the chair, any disclosures tonight? Ms. Barker.
Start at the other end.
Commissioner Robinson.
None.
Commissioner Strike.
None.
Commissioner Walker.
No disclosures.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, I have a disclosure on case 2014-0213, the Lucy Pit extension. AS&G is a client of mine. The applicant's representative, Dow, is a client or is a subcontractor to me on an AS&G project. My project has nothing to do with Lucy Pit. I have had no contact with the client or anybody else regarding Lucy Pit on it. I have no financial interest in the Lucy Pit project.
Thank you. Through the chair, in regard to the aforementioned case, I move that the chair participate in the case based on the fact he has no significant financial interest or personal interest in the case.
Second.
We have a motion. We have a second. I don't have it on my machine. We'll use our thumb method, please. All in favor, thumbs up. The chair is directed to participate. I have no other disclosures.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Dean, do you have any disclosures this evening?
On that same case, I use the Lucy Pit for my business to get rid of debris from job sites, and we've used it for years. I'm not a big customer of theirs. I've been to it myself a few times. I don't have any financial dealings with Anchorage Sand and Gravel other than pay my bill every month.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. I'll entertain a positive motion to direct Ms. Dean to participate in the case.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Spring and a second by Mr. Sporhees. Please use your machines. Ms. Dean is directed to participate.
Thank you.
Ms. Barker? Or no? Mr. Spring or
Mr.
Ms.
Spring, sorry.
Yes,
Disclosures.
I'd like to abstain from voting on resolution 2015-002 due to the fact that I was not in attendance at that meeting.
002.
What is the name? Okay. We're going to handle all the consent agenda at one time, or a different way, John. We're going to handle them each individually, and so that you can, because we have everybody on every case tonight, just about. Okay? That's okay with you?
Okay.
Mr. Sporhays, any disclosures this evening?
None. Thank you.
Ms. Barker, any disclosures?
Maybe need some help from Lori here, but I believe that I was not present for any of the items on the consent agenda. Therefore, will not be able to vote.
That is correct. But what I plan to do on the consent agenda, we're going to pull all the items and then vote at them one at a time because it's a mismatch across the board on that.
So I will abstain from voting on any of them.
Okay. Thank
Thank you, Lori.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Kange, do you have any disclosures?
No, I have none.
Thank you very much. It's time for our annual elections. I sent the procedures out. I have been corrected by one person that explained to me that all nominations require a second. So I believe what I wrote was correct, but I've been told I was wrong. So any nominations will require a second. Anyone else have any changes, any other changes to the procedure I sent out last week? Mr. Spring.
Yes, I appreciate you sending those out. It's good to reread those every once in a while. I just have a slight disagreement about your interpretation of the procedures, and I don't know if, I'd like to get it clarified, I think. And we've talked about it before, once or twice, regarding the election of a vice chair and what happens in October. Say, for instance, our current chair is reelected and then is off the commission in October, and the vice chair then it was my opinion that, according to procedures, there'd be a new election for chair, and that the vice chair would not automatically become the chair. Now, I know Commissioner Ferguson has a different interpretation. I wonder if it would be helpful if the staff could kind of elaborate or elucidate that issue for us. Would that be helpful or in the voting before we make any motions?
Since it doesn't have any action until October, what I would prefer is if we ask the staff to look into that but not take up time tonight.
That'd be okay, except it might make a difference in the voting if you knew that the person you're voting for vice chair would automatically become chair.
Ms. McConnell, would you care to weigh in on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Code of Regulations states that the vice chair shall assume the duties of the chair in the event of absence or inability of the chair. I think that implies a situation where the chair cannot be at the meeting. I think, a situation where there is no chair because the chair has left the commission would be a cause for a new election.
Well, it's an absence, and in the absence of the chair, the vice chair takes over. Now, I've got to believe sometime in this city's history, this issue has been addressed prior to us.
I would be happy to do some research.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Mr. Spring?
I guess your original proposal is in effect, then we'll wait until October.
Ms. Dean?
Mr. Chair, should we wait then to vote till next week so we have more information on how it should go?
The code says we vote tonight.
Okay, just checking.
Okay. If anybody wants to take a different interpretation. Okay. Seeing no one wanting to carry that forward, I will announce the nominations for the vice chair are open. Mr. Spring,
I would like to nominate Commissioner Robinson.
do we have a second? We have a second with Mr. Sporhees. I guess when we vote, if we get 5 votes, we don't need to, that would close the nominations. Mr. Strike?
No, I believe I'm good.
You're good? Okay. Well, we've got a nomination for Mr. Robinson. Does Mr. Robinson or I forgot who made the motion care to speak? Does Mr. Robinson or Mr. Spring care to speak?
Well, I'd speak. As I see it, it's a pretty easy seat to hold, at least till October, because our chair has such stellar attendance record. But in the event that he is not available, I'd be happy to take over his duties.
Very good. Mr. Spring?
I'd just like to add that I think Commissioner Robinson has the tenure, I think, in this case. He's been on the longest and among the persons that aren't chair and vice chair, and has a lot of experience in planning and comprehensive planning and zoning. I think he'll be very good chair or vice chair if he's called upon to do it.
Any other discussion? Mr. Strike?
Yes, without making signs and putting them up in the hallway, I suggest we vote.
Very, very good. Would you please use your machines to vote? Congratulations, Mr. Robinson. You are elected unanimously as a vice chair. May I suggest that for the rest of the meeting, unless you want to change seats with Ms. Dean, we'll let you stay down there.
That works.
Okay, thank you very much. Nominations for the chair are now open. Mr. Spring. Strike? God. Who made that? Who? Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't.
No, I think he was saying that you made the motion.
Okay. Thank you. We have a second by Mr. Spring. I get it. Thank you for the vote of confidence. Do we have any discussion? Mr. Spring.
I'd just like to compliment the existing chair on the job he's done in the past year or so, and I think he deserves to continue. I would like to add one thing, though, just to clarify that Commissioner Dean did not request to be renominated, I think, and it's not, I did not nominate Commissioner Robinson because I didn't think Commissioner Dean wasn't doing a good job. I wanted to make that clear.
Okay, any other comments? Please use your machines. That went 8-1 on that one. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I also would like to thank Ms. Dean for her efforts for a year as vice chair. She's done a really excellent job, and the vice chair does not get nearly the credit that they do. And I do appreciate her help through this thing. We've been in many meetings together where she's been an asset to us, and I appreciate that. And I've also appreciated her common sense and logic approach to what we do on that. So thank you very much, Ms. Dean, for your help on that one. On the consent agenda, Ms. Barker, I would ask that you pull all the items on the consent agenda. May I have a second on that motion? I need a second. I have a second by Mr. Walker. The reason I ask you to pull them is because on case 2015-002, Spring, Sporhees, and Barker are excused from voting. So we're going to have to take these things individually. So if that's okay with everyone, can I have a motion to approve Resolution 2015-002 or a motion to approve it with changes if there's anything to be changed? Mr. Walker? Was that a motion to approve, Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Thank you. That was seconded by Ms. Dean. Any discussion? Please use your machines. What?
Well, Tyler, did you want to have a discussion about, you had some issues with the pavement? Did you feel like you got closure there? Or?
Good question. Thank you.
Appreciate it through the chair. I think the issue, as I saw it, was one that we did not require a condition of the pavement. I felt like, in retrospect, the response from the staff report was a little bit misleading. I think staff clarified it after the meeting, but notice of reconsideration was not spread. So I don't think there's anything we can do relative to this resolution here in front of us. I will say that I think it should be, frankly, a lesson as we consider future conditional uses, what is and what is not appropriate to take up. And I think that this commission has a little more leeway than was sort of framed for our undertaking that evening. But I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much. Please use your machine on Resolution 2015-002. That resolution is carried with two abstain with Spring and Sporhees, and with the correct 3 abstaining. Okay, Resolution 2015-003. Ms. Barker is the only one abstaining on that one. Can I have a motion to approve? Mr. Spring, seconded by Ms. Dean. Anyone have any comments, corrections, notes? Please use your machines. That motion carried with Ms. Barker abstaining. May I have a motion on Resolution 2015-005? Barker, Ferguson, and Strike are excluded on that one. We've got a motion by Ms. Dean, seconded by Mr. Kange. Any discussion? Barker, Ferguson, and Strike are excused or abstain. That motion passed. Are we good? That motion passed. Resolution 2015-006, Ferguson, Strike, and Barker are abstaining on that one. Ms. Dean, seconded by Mr. Kange. Any discussion? Please use your machines. Pardon? Yeah, I need to. I made my mistake. There we go. Thank you. All right. The next case before us is the Anchorage School District, Anchorage School District 6-year capital plan, case 2014-0218. We've had the staff report. We've had the public hearing. I guess all that there is to do is to, we need a motion, people. The chair would appreciate, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Strike.
Thank you. I will move to approve case 2014-0218, the Anchorage School District 6-year capital improvement plan, recommended from this body for approval. Okay.
Okay, thank you. We have a second from Mr. Kange. Mr. Spring.
Is the approval with the resolution as written by staff and submitted in the packet? Is that what we're approving? We're approving that separately? Okay. So we need to make findings then or make findings similar to the ones that are in the resolution?
I believe, Mr. Strike, what is your motion? Okay.
My motion is for the acceptance of the resolution as written with recommendations from the staff. Okay. And after Commissioner Spring is done, I'd like to comment then during the open period.
Okay. You're in the queue. Mr. Spring, anything
Yes,
else?
well, I have some proposed changes to the findings as written by staff and included in the resolution 2015-008, if I may.
Okay.
And I suppose that this would be in the form of an amendment then, since it's a change in the resolution findings.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I may interrupt, this action requires two separate motions. At your last meeting, this was a case on the agenda for the commission to review and make recommendations on the school district CIP to the school board and the assembly. You had a presentation, you discussed the case, but no actual action was taken. So the staff member drafted a resolution based on the discussion that you had, and perhaps there are some things you'd like to change. But the first thing you need to do is take an action on the case, which is to make a recommendation on the CIP to the school board and the assembly. Once you've done that, then you would move to approve the resolution, and you can then make changes through that second motion. Does that make sense?
Would you restate the two actions we need to take?
So the first action is the action that should have happened at the last meeting, which would be a motion to make a recommendation on the school district CIP to the school board and the assembly.
Okay.
And based on what you expressed at your last meeting, that was that you had no recommended changes. So you implied that you would like to recommend the school district CIP for approval to the school district and the assembly as it was presented to you.
Okay.
The formalization of your action is a resolution which we draft it for you, the staff drafts it for you, and then you review and make sure that you agree that we wrote down what you said and thought, and then you approve the resolution. to be efficient and get this to those other bodies quickly, we took the discussion from your last meeting and put it into resolution form for you to also adopt tonight.
And that is what's E1.
Correct.
Correct.
But again, you need two motions.
Okay, so the first one would be approval of the memorandum, basically, that's on page 1.
It would be to recommend to the school board and the assembly approval of the school district CIP as presented to you.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Mr. Strike, I believe that's your motion. Thank you. Mr. Spring, I believe what we just said was different than what we just told you before. That's fine. Okay. Do you have anything further to say?
No, except that we need a brief discussion maybe to establish findings.
Yeah, but that would
You think, unless you think it's already been done in the last meeting.
that would come with the next motion.
Usually we do that as a part of the approval of the original motion, and then we approve the resolution, which is the findings are based in the resolution on the
Okay.
original motion. But if you think it's already been taken care of in the past meeting, I'm fine with
Well,
that.
we're going to talk about the findings as part of that, so. Okay. Mr. Strike.
Yes, in regards to my motion, I will not be supporting that motion. And my rationale is that at the time that we heard the school district's presentation on the CIP budget, they had to have been fully aware of the current action of the lawsuit that had been taking place down in Ketchikan Borough against the state for funding at school levels, school district levels. And in light of recent developments of that court finding, there's some work that needs to be done.
I don't disagree with your comments, but they could have been aware of the suit, but nobody knew which way the judge was coming down, and they're caught, I would not want them to anticipate that, and so they marched forward. We're talking something that happened late last week, and this took place almost a month ago, and so I'm not too quick to criticize them. I would, maybe that becomes finding number one if you want, that we ask them to address that issue.
I believe the economic conditions over the last 3 weeks in this finding brings to light that they may have presented us a silver-plated plan. I didn't label it a gold-plated plan, but in light of that, in light of today's market and information that we have today, we have the joy, we have the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. We've got a court case that was that was adjudicated this past week, that's under appeal, understand, but there's a lot of questions out there as to what the impact is. And for that reason, I'm uncomfortable, and while I will not be supporting this motion, to present to the Assembly for the approval of the CIP budget on behalf of the school district.
Okay, you're absolutely right. Mr. Spring and then Mr. Robinson.
I don't want to prolong the discussion unnecessarily, but I'd like a little clarification about what the impact of that ruling might be. My understanding was that it had to do with the responsibility of the state, as stated in the Constitution of the state, for funding education. And the finding was that, yes, indeed, the state is obligated to fully fund education, it seemed. Would that, I'm not sure how that would change or make a difference in their proposed CIP, which was assumed that it was going to be bond funded with reimbursement by the state. Do you think that formula would change as a result of that, or is that it would change the CIP recommendations or funding?
I believe it will.
I don't understand how.
The state's funding for the school districts, for schools, will have to change. The state will have to come up with money. They will not be able to tax at the municipal level in the property taxes and go to the citizen for those funds.
But if they're responsible, wouldn't they have to pay for whatever
Okay, for
CIP?
the very reason then, I'm not going to support this, then the state of Alaska, the legislature really needs to approve their plan under today's current funding limits.
You done, Mr. Spring? Mr. Robinson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to add that what we're being asked to do is make a recommendation to the school board and to the assembly. So I think with that, I think it's perhaps more appropriate to frame Mr. Strike's concern as a recommendation rather than to simply say throw it all out. I mean, I think there might be a little more thought given to it if there's a succinct recommendation that says, in light of the recent ruling, as you move forward, it would be, in all of our benefit to understand what the true implications are and to sort of revet that. I mean, I think that's totally appropriate, but I think simply denying it, you might lose that, what I think you're trying to achieve. Just a thought there.
Was that a motion, Mr. Robinson?
No, it wasn't a motion. It was, I think a request for maybe, again, as I see it here, we're being asked to approve a recommendation, the CIP. We're recommending the CIP to the assembly and to the school district. If we're recommending it with additional caveats, then we ought to state those. So just a friendly suggestion is all, Mr. Chair.
That was a very good one. We have a motion by Mr. Strike. We have a second by Mr. Kange. Is there any further discussion? Okay, please use your machines. That motion has carried 7 yes, 1 nay, and 1 abstaining. So now we get to the resolution, and now, Mr. Spring, would be the time to discuss your findings.
Yes, I'll make it in form of a motion to approve the resolution, draft resolution 2015-008 with the following amendments to the findings. First amendment is to delete finding number 2, which states the Anchorage School District provided justification for the potential construction and or closing of schools based on membership projections, current and projected capacity and operating levels, and replace it with the following language. Due to the projected slow growth of the school-age population within the municipality of Anchorage, the Planning and Zoning Commission agrees with the recommendation to forego any new school construction within the 6-year time frame, but nevertheless to monitor the growth within the southwest area of the Anchorage Bowl to determine if the projections are on track, and indeed there's no need for new construction within that time frame. A little cumbersome, but I think that replaces the number 2, which I don't believe, they didn't intend to provide justification for potential construction because there is no potential construction that they recommended. Amendment number 2 is adding finding number 5. Planning and Zoning Commission agrees with the prioritization of school reconstruction and remodeling projects, which appears to be based on a sound methodology. To something I think we needed to add. And number 6, and this is, I'm doing this ad hoc to try to respond to Commissioner Strike's comment, urge the Anchorage School District to assess the impact of the recent Alaska court system finding regarding the constitutionality of state requirement to fund school, fully fund school operations and building and construction.
Okay, now, let's take those two, let's take that as a motion with one amendment, and the amendment has got 3 parts. I only have 3 findings of fact on my list and you started out with 5 and 6. I think you meant 4 and 5.
Thank you for the correction, yeah. You're
Okay.
right.
We have a second by Mr. Strike. Madam Clerk, did you get the verbiage down? Would you, Mr. Spring, would you go over the insertion on, after we delete finding 2, would you go over the insertion?
Sure. The replacement for finding 2 reads, due to the slow growth of the school-age population within the municipality of Anchorage, due to the projected slow growth of the school-age population within the municipality of Anchorage, the Planning and Zoning Commission agrees with the recommendation to forego any new school construction within the 6-year time frame, but nevertheless urges the school district to continuing monitoring growth within the southwest sub-area of Anchorage to determine if their projections continue to track. I don't like that word.
Do we
To
have
track the projections, yeah.
any comments or discussions on those? Madam Clerk, do you have that down? On that one. Seeing no further comments, would you please use your machines to vote on the resolution with changes? That passed. That passed 8-1 on that. Thank you very much. That is one that's going to be very interesting as we go forward, is all I'm going to say. Next item before us is the case 2014-0213, the Lucy Pitt extension. Do we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The department's recommending approval of the 3-year time extension request based on the non-objection of the reviewing agencies. The time extension was provided for in the original approval, and that's cited in your staff memo. Be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
I appreciate the very brief report. This is not a public hearing on that. Do anyone have any questions for staff? Seeing and hearing no questions for staff, can we have a motion, please? Ms. Dean.
In the matter of case 2014-0213, minor amendment to a final conditional use for a natural resource extraction site, I move to extend their approval for another 3 years until January 31, 2018.
We have a second by Ms. Barker. Do we have any comments, questions, anything else? Seeing none, please use, oops, Commissioner Spring.
I don't have any objections. I just wondered if there's some comments that or findings that might be made for the resolution. And I would just like to state that I think the petitioner has shown that they met the conditions of the original approval, and that they have religiously submitted their annual reports as required, and much appreciated by the commission, I think, for that respect. And it seems obvious that this pit serves a vital function for the development community and should be continued in operation.
Ms. Dean.
I agree with Commissioner Spring and this particular property has been an asset to have in Anchorage instead of having to drive to the valley. It's really nice to be able to do this type of operation here right in town. Their process is very clean. They keep very good track of their property, and off-site also, they aren't spilling debris all over from trucks leaving the site. They keep it very well contained, and they have been friendly neighbors to the community.
Any other comments? Please use your machines. That motion carried unanimously. On case 2014-0204, the chair would appreciate a motion to postpone this in accordance with the petitioner's request to the May 11th meeting. We have a motion by Mr. Kane, seconded by Ms. Dean. Any further discussion? That? Okay, use your machines. I'll get. That case is postponed to May 11th. Please bring your packets with you on May 11th so we don't have to republish them on that. I don't know what. Okay. I should have announced this earlier. Case 2014-0219 is postponed. So if you were here for that, I apologize. When is it postponed to? What? May I have a chair? May I have a motion, please, to postpone case 2014-0219 to April 6th? I've got a motion by Ms. Dean, seconded by Mr. Kange. Please use your machines. Go ahead.
Yes, with these items that are being postponed and with the amount of paperwork we have in our packet, are you asking that we go ahead and retain all of these various documents? Or, you know, your filing system might be better than mine.
After your comment earlier this evening, Mr. Strike, I don't know if that's true, but
Hey, I put a sign out there in the hallway that you were running for election.
thank you. That's how come I've got a fine notice here from A Pocket from the city for illegal campaigning on that one. Yes, because I have notes on mine.
Okay.
And I have reviewed them.
Yep.
So I'm going to take them home. So I'm asking that you retain them.
Okay.
The next case is 2014-022, Atlas Tower Holdings, an appeal of a denial by the administrative official of an administrative site plan review. Before I turn that over to the staff, I would like to explain that when I read this packet, it was unclear to me what our action was and why it was a public hearing. So I asked Ms. McConnell to clarify that to me, and that's the reason we got a packet over the weekend. And Ms. McConnell, I appreciate your efforts to sending that out on Sunday. I understand how precious a Sunday is, but I appreciate that. May we have and this is a public hearing, may we have a staff report on case 2014-022, on 022, please.
Mr. Chair, my name's Jillian Inglis. I work in the Planning Division. Can I first ask a question? Is the petitioner or the petitioner's representative in the audience, please? Okay, thank you. I'm going to provide sufficiency of notice. 38 notices were sent out on January 29, 2015. One notice was received in writing opposed to placing the tower at this location, but provided another location. And then today, we received a flurry of comments on the system. We received about 12 comments opposing the placement of the tower. This plan came before the commission in May of 2014, and at that time the request was for a 140-foot tower, and it required a conditional use permit. At the time, the commission ended up 4 commissioners approved and 3 were opposed, so the motion did not pass to approve the 140-foot tower. However, we noted in the minutes and in the discussion with the commission that they were concerned of the view, and they were also concerned that there might be alternative locations to place the tower. So then the applicant asked for a reconsideration and submitted the reconsideration, and the commission denied the reconsideration. Then Atlas submitted an administrative site plan review reducing the tower from 140 feet to 95 feet with co-location. In residential districts, you can have a 65-foot tower, and then you can increase the height 15 to 30 feet based on co-location. During the review of the application, we found that there was interest in co-locating on the tower, but we did not have any assurances of who would co-locate on the tower. And so that was one reason why we denied the application. There were 2 other reasons that we denied the applications, and we respond to appeal points 1 and 2 in the packet on page 6. I'm sorry, appeal points number 1 and 3, the petitioner's appeal points. That the plan does not meet the goals of the Turnagain Arm Comprehensive Plan and search for suitable sites. The Seward Highway is part of the Alaska Scenic Byways Plan, byway, and also has 2 other designations as it's part of the Alaska Scenic Byways Plan and the All-American Road and the USDA Forest Service Scenic Byway. And I showed you a picture on page 5 of where that scenic byway area is. However, we found that there is really no enforcement teeth in the plan, but it does recognize that the roads with outstanding scenic, historic, cultural, natural, recreation, and architectural qualities. So this area is designated by 3 different plans for its scenic view and scenic qualities. So we decided that the site did not meet the requirements of the comprehensive plan because it had an adverse effect on the view shed, and that so goals 1 and 2 were not met, and that and it did not meet the core values of the Turnagain Arm Comprehensive Plan. In regard to procedural appeal points, the petitioner did bring up that we did not timely process their application. It says in code that the administrative official shall take action on the site plan within 50 days of submission of the application. We believe the decision came about 7 days late, but was well within the required federal shot clock of 150 days. With that, the recommendation, and I also provided some pictures of the site. We do have a concern. We did not know at the time that the building is actually not occupied. There hasn't been a use there for some time. And so with that, towers in the R11 district are only permitted with a permitted non-residential use or a residential use of 6 dwelling units or more. And so I took some pictures and provided you what the building looks like, what the land looks like. There's a sales notice on the property, which is fine, but there's also a lease request. And when I went out to the property, it did look like it had been abandoned for some time. The wall, the Tidewater Cafe was coming off, and I was hearing comments that the property has not been used for some time, and I think some of the community came out and said that in their comments in the email today. So with that said, I'll turn this over to the board, and if you have any questions, then I'll reserve time for rebuttal.
Okay. Thank you very much. Prior to asking the applicant if he wants to respond, I got to read a little bit about public testimony, and then we'll ask the applicant to step up. Apparently, Mr. Robinson, you have a question for staff?
If I may, could I just get staff to reiterate once again the relevance of whether the petition was denied, whether or not there was an abandoned use on the property? Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. That was not one of our points that we pointed out during the administrative site plan review. We relied on the tax records, and we missed it that it was not actually occupied. Otherwise, we would have made that a finding at the time. And
again, clarify that if that had been known, the issue there is you can't have a tower as a principal use. It's only permitted as an accessory use within the R11 zoning district. Is that right?
Through the chair, Mr. Robinson, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Spring, then Ms. Dean.
Yeah, I was a little confused by that, too. It's an accessory use, or is it allowed in zoning districts, commercial zoning districts?
Well, in this case, it's the property zoned R11, and the Turnagain Arm recognizes the property in the plan, recognizes it as mixed residential. But in the code, in the R11 code, it specifically says, and I'll find you the location of it in just a second here. In the R11 under 2140-117, under permitted principal uses, B5, with a permitted non-residential use or residential use of 6 dwelling units or more as a secondary and subordinate use, and as specified in supplementary district regulation, antennas without tower structures, type 1-3 local interest towers, and type 4 towers and antennas. So it's permitted if you have, it's basically permitted if you have a permitted non-residential use, so one of these permitted uses in here under the R11, or if you have at least 6 dwelling units or more. And in this case, they are proposing to put in a type 1 monopole tower.
Thank you for the clarification. It seems as if the key word is use, which means not a zoning district, or is actually a viable use. I have another question, though, if I may, through the chair.
Go ahead.
The staff report mentioned potential for railroad property location for the tower to the north of this site. I'd like to know a little bit more about that. I didn't see any reference to the actual location, and I didn't see anything from the railroad about stating that they were willing to discuss this. Do you have any additional information on that?
While visiting the site, I noticed that, and I'm going to talk about two different things that I forgot to mention, but I noticed that about a half a mile down Glacier, is it Portage Glacier Road, or right about a half mile down the road, there is a Chugach Electric substation. That might be a potential location. I don't know if they've talked to Chugach Electric, and I believe it is actually Alaska Railroad land. When I looked on the tax records today, there's also, Erica, do you remember the other location?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, we did have some email communication with the real estate department at the railroad, who indicated that they do have a large reserve in Portage and state, and I'm quoting, there is a possibility that land out of the right-of-way could be used.
Oh, just one more follow-up question then. Not a follow-up question, a separate question, but the Turnagain Arm Plan policy calls for view shed analysis for signs and lights along the Seward Highway. And I'm assuming this is similar. This would, although you might quibble that this is not a sign or light, but it's probably has more impact than sign or light. Do you consider what their submittal is sufficient in terms of what we would consider to be a standard view shed analysis, or adequate? The pictures, they basically submitted pictures from various locations. Is that similar to what you've received in other cases with, for view shed analysis?
I have, oftentimes for the tower sites, when they submit them, they show simulations. In this case, the tower is not proposed to be lighted or is required to be lighted by the FCC or FAA, sorry, FAA. I have not had experience in the past in this area for analysis of the view shed. I'd have to defer to Erica if she has any comments about that.
Just that what they submitted from a, what did you call it? The simulation is typical of what we receive for tower cases.
Ms. Dean.
Through the chair, my question on staff is, from a procedure standpoint, since we are hearing the appeal of the director's decision, can we only base our decision on the reasons why the director denied the application and not look at new information that you are introducing tonight potentially, just so that we follow the correct procedure? I'm not used to being in this position, and I don't want to make a misstep.
I believe in the memorandum from Ms. McConnell, March 1st, 2015, to the Commission. This can be considered by the Commission as a new conditional use permit. You can either uphold the appeal, deny the appeal with the findings, you know, with your own findings, or you can substitute your own findings in the and approve or deny it and substitute your own findings.
So we do not have to rely solely on the information, the reasoning for the denial. Just wanted to clarify that on the record so that we all know for sure that we're on the right track here.
Yeah, no, you do not. You can, through public testimony, you may find out new information that you're not aware of, and you may use that information.
Thank you.
Okay. Before we ask the applicant to come forward, the procedure by which the public may speak to the Commission at its meeting is, after the staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, the chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the Commission rules and procedures. Petitioners, including all his or her representatives, 10 minutes. Part of this time may be reserved for rebuttal. Representative of groups, community councils, PTAs, 5 minutes. Individuals, 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by this Commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the Commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except Commission's recommendations to the Assembly, which are not appealable. Appeals must be filed with the Clerk's Office within 20 days after approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission of the resolution, which is the Commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. Any individual may request findings from any Commission decision with 7 days. If the applicant is present, would you please come forward and state your name for the record?
Good evening. My name is Michael Powers, and I'm a representative of the applicant, Atlas Tower Holdings.
The last name was Powers?
Powers, P-O-W-E-R-S, and yes, that rhymes with towers.
Okay. Very good, sir. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, sir. It's an interesting case, actually. It's quite a lengthy procedural history and some interesting technical issues that we're going to have to work through. And I hope you've had the time to read through most or even all of the documentation that's in the packet. I know it's quite lengthy, and it's going to be impossible for me not to assume that you're familiar with some of the documentation in that packet. But I am going to start with a couple of comments about land use, and then jump into procedural history. I know the staff has already touched on that, but I think there's some details that are worth talking through. And then I'll get to the specific reasons why the case was denied, and try to try to talk through those issues. So for starters, this is a land use issue. As everyone knows, most of the things that come before you, I guess, are fundamentally land use issues. And when I think about land use issues, I want to just remind the Commission of some of the goals, maybe not all of the goals, and maybe not all of the goals that you think about when you think about land use planning, but a few common goals that we should all be focused on include allowing for landowners, property owners, to actually use their property and to allow for the development of both economic activity and for the possibility of infrastructure being developed. And sort of as a corollary to that, I know that the goal of zoning is to guide that as opposed to restricting or limiting it. And so as we think about the various rules and comprehensive plans and so on, I want to just point out that we should be thinking about how can specific uses be allowed. I'm not sure if that's really been a focus of some of the review that this case has gone through. Third, I want to point out that this case presents a pretty powerful conflict, not conflict, but balancing that's required between property rights, the needs of continuity and maintaining and preserving the scenic beauty of the community, and also providing and developing infrastructure to assist the community in economic development and engaging in business activity. There's a bunch of different things going on here. This is real, if you think about it from that perspective, it's kind of a complex tug and pull of different needs. And lastly, I want to think about land use planning, and I'm hoping you're focusing on this. I would hope that the goal of the staff and the Commission is that all land use plan decisions are made in a way that would avoid arbitrary decisions and promote some predictability, so that we don't have this type of procedural history where we have multiple levels of the same application coming before the staff and this Commission. So I'm going to turn now to the procedural history. Some of this will be slightly repetitive. I know the staff has talked about the procedural history, but specifically I want to run through the events. In January of 2014, Atlas Tower submitted an application for a 140-foot tower through a conditional use permit process. The staff failed to mention that they did a thorough review of that application, and they recommended it for approval. That's a critical piece, because at that point in time, our application was reviewed. Presumably these various plans, the Turnagain Comprehensive Plan, the Scenic Byways designation, and of course the municipality's code were presumably considered before recommending that for approval. So after that recommendation of approval, it came before this Commission. And another interesting nuance is that at that time we unfortunately didn't have all of you present. We had a body of 7 instead of 9. And the vote is interesting because there were 4 votes in favor of approving this application under the conditional use process and 3 against. And that results, oddly to me, in a denial, because a minimum of 5 votes are required, despite the majority in favor of approval. So what happened next was another factual detail that staff report, the staff maybe wasn't entirely aware of, but it is laid out in our request for a rehearing. Based on this Commission's denial, based on that 4 in favor and 3 against vote, we went back to our client and said, listen, it's quite clear that the height is a significant issue, and that's the one factor that we have very good control over. What can we do about it? Up until that point in time, our client, Verizon Wireless, had told us under no uncertain terms that 140 feet was the height that was absolutely required to meet the needs for their technical plan for development of infrastructure. But when confronted with the reality of an impossibility of approval at that height, they then agreed to basically re-engineer the infrastructure and undertake or accept infrastructure that was not as effective and comprehensive as a result. So we applied for a rehearing under change of facts and circumstances, and unfortunately I don't think that really was considered as thoroughly as it might have been. It would have been interesting to come back before you and have a discussion about it, but
You have 3 more minutes.
nonetheless, thank you. It was denied. Under our current application, we have essentially been denied based on 3 factors. The first one is that we've not met the terms and conditions of the Turnagain Comprehensive Plan. Well, we have in fact met the goals of the plan. There are a lot of goals and policies in the plan, but as you go through the various goals, the first goal is to preserve the scenic quality, natural environment, and open spaces. Our proposed plan does not destroy the scenic quality, natural environment, and open spaces. We don't change those characteristics. In fact, the type of infrastructure we want to build is a monopole, which is very similar to the power lines that are already in place in that area. So we're not trying to do anything that hasn't already been done in this area, and we're only trying to build one pole, not 40 or 50 or 60. Not really sure how many Chugach Electric has in the area. Goal 2 is to balance economic development and community character and rural quality of life. There's a balance. Well, this clearly cuts to the heart of the issue here, because we are bringing an economic development that provides a service and resource to the community. There are multiple places in the Turnagain Plan, comprehensive plan, where the need for good internet service and wireless communications is needed. And I'll just point out the pages since I don't have enough time to go through all of these points, but that point is raised on page 27, 32, 30 through 32, 38, page 50, page 53. If you go to the comprehensive plan, you'll see there are multiple references to the need for better wireless coverage, better communication, better safety systems, all of the things that this application will provide to the area. The third goal is to provide community growth that sustains and supports diverse land uses consistent with community values. Wireless infrastructure is proven to increase economic activity and expand the possibilities for small businesses. Number 4, maintain, preserve, and provide recreation opportunities. Self-service allows visitors to take advantage of and learn more about what's available in the area. The fifth item about community participation in transportation is not applicable. Number 6 is to provide a safe and secure community.
Can you summarize quickly, please?
Thank you, sir. There's too much in here for me to move so fast, but I hope you, as you review this, you think about the competing interests. You consider that our proposal does actually bring something to the community, and that when you consider whether or not to approve or deny this, that you balance the property rights, the Turnagain Comprehensive Plan, which wants to promote economic development, and that you consider the benefit to the community when viewing this project. I hope I get to answer some questions so we can perhaps discuss other items. Thank you so much.
Stay right there for a couple minutes.
Yes, sir.
Ms. McConnell, you were in there earlier and I didn't see you until after you started. I
Thank
apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to appreciate that you read out the kind of public hearing instructions to the public, but I also wanted to clarify that this is a little different from a normal case in that the appeal section in the tower regulation specifically states that an appeal from this decision tonight would go directly to Superior Court, not to the Board of Adjustment. So I wanted to clarify that for everybody here. I also have a question for the petitioner, but I will defer until after the commission has an opportunity.
Okay. We'll come back to you. Ms. Ingles? Ms. Inglis?
Mr. Chair, I had some questions for the petitioner, but I can also defer until the commission has had the opportunity.
We'll come back to you.
Okay.
Ms. Dean?
Through the chair, my question is on the co-location issue. I know that the particular client is Verizon. They use a different technology than other companies. Because they use a different technology than everybody else, would that affect co-location?
No, to be honest, I'm not exactly sure how to respond, but let me give you a little basic information. There's really only two types of wireless technology that's used in the United States. There's CDMA and GSM, kind of like French and Spanish. They don't necessarily always talk to each other. The devices and radios are different. But in today's environment, most mobile phones or mobile devices actually have both radios, a CDMA and a GSM radio in them. The equipment installed on the tower doesn't conflict with the other. So it's certainly possible to have both technologies in the same location, so that it wouldn't conflict with the goal of co-location. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Mr. Strike?
Yes, thank you, and through the chair. I understand you represent Verizon. I guess my question to Verizon is, why don't they approach the utility that owns the power poles and look to put their apparatus on the power pole that's already out there?
It's an interesting suggestion, and in fact, it has been tried aggressively over many years to try to move the community more, not the community, move for more co-location on power lines. There are some fundamental issues with making that happen, some practical concerns that make it very difficult. One of which is all across the country, including the Chugach Electric, they're generally very reluctant to allow for co-location in places where it's going to be dangerous. So there's a practical concern. It's very difficult for telecom and a dangerous utility like power to share their same infrastructure. Sure, it is possible.
It's being done all the way on the West Coast. It's being done from LA all the way out to Phoenix, consistently.
It is technically possible, but it is very impractical.
Has Chugach been approached?
We have spoken to Chugach Electric about many sites, and we have not to date been able to find a location that where it made sense.
So it doesn't make sense at this location?
No. The safety concerns about having the telecommunication equipment on the same site as the high-tension power wires is a problem. Maintenance is a problem. Generally speaking, the Chugach Electric would not allow third-party vendors, in other words, the telecom equipment, the telecom company's own employees, to access the tower. Typically, maintenance and repairs and upgrades require shutting down of the electric network for a period of time in order to do that, which makes a whole bunch of practical concerns make that sort of what you're talking about, a pole placement, as a practical matter, very difficult. Yes.
And just one more question, and through the chair, did you testify at the last hearing in May?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I just want to go on the record that you do have your letter of authorization from the petitioner, from the landowner, to represent them. But I do note that it is dated July 30th, 2014. And at the May 12th hearing, you indicated that you had this letter. I just find it ironic that the letter that's produced is now dated nearly 2.5 months after the fact.
The letter was mailed more than once. I think it was lost. For starters, when we...
So if it was lost, you never received it?
It was mailed from the owner of the property directly to the Planning and Zoning Commission. But before we even started that process, we signed a lease with the owner of the property, and a very specific condition of that lease includes a full authorization for us to represent landowner for the specific purpose of this use. So we had that documentation and legal authority before we ever started the process. We also did provide it not once but twice to the staff.
Thank you.
Ms. Barker?
Thank you, through the chair. Could you comment on the existing wireless coverage in the area and how this utility would change that?
Sure. The existing wireless communication infrastructure in this area is known to be very poor. Essentially, what you have throughout this area is installations that are essentially almost entirely on the Alaska Railroad right-of-way on wooden poles, short wooden poles, which are structurally inadequate for some of the newer technologies. The type of equipment that's typically being installed in this phase of wireless, the 4G to LTE, requires the installation of panels that are heavier and longer than the older equipment. And they often also require different height parameters and other issues. We did study that very carefully because obviously that would have been a much easier way to solve this problem. That was not a technically available possibility.
Through the chair, you didn't quite answer my question, though, about how installing this pole is going to change, alter, improve wireless coverage in the area. I mean, how far does it go now? How far will it go, with this pole? I understand it's the difference in technology, but I guess I'm trying to think spatially about the coverage area and what the improvement would be in coverage, if there is any.
There's a significant improvement in coverage. There were some coverage maps that were provided as part of our packet. It's hard for me to articulate in words exactly what the coverage enhancement is. But the project would bring two things: a greatly enhanced coverage of the area, which is known to have significant gaps, and it will also bring to the area a much improved capability for advanced high-speed data, which the area pretty much has very limited capability at this time. Most of the existing equipment throughout the area is a 2G, 3G. It's an older technology that's being replaced now.
Just one more question through the chair. Given this is really kind of an out-of-the-way rural location, and I understand, I see that calls get dropped, that it's very spotty coverage out there. I guess my question is, why does your client want to install this pole in this location? I mean, there's nothing there.
The reason is quite simple. There is an enormous consumer demand for this type of coverage pretty much almost everywhere humans go. And I understand that when you go to that area, particularly this time of year, there's not very many humans. But as we all know, that highway moves quite a number of people and product and commerce throughout the summer. It is an area that not only needs coverage, but also it's driven not by Verizon, but actually by the consumers, by the people that live there. And lastly, I think it's worthy of a comment, and that is that this is kind of a utility. In fact, the FCC in the most recent net neutrality case ruling has basically said that wireless is a utility. Maybe there are less users in the wintertime than there might be in the summer as compared to some other area in Anchorage. But those folks also deserve to have the same infrastructure and advanced capabilities that folks here in downtown Anchorage enjoy. They have the same needs and desires, and you might make an analogy to the late 1800s when we were concerned about bringing power to places and homes outside of the city centers.
Thank you. No further question.
Any Any more questions from commissioners? Mr. Walker.
So there's other towers in the area, aren't there, that are owned by other companies?
There are a handful of small wood poles that are mostly developed by ACS, which has now been swallowed up by the AWN, Alaska Wireless Network infrastructure. There isn't a single piece of infrastructure that would provide the coverage required by Verizon, and quite frankly, by the current needs of AT&T and AWN. We did submit letters from AT&T and AWN supporting this project. They didn't do that because they wanted to give a leg up to their competitor, Verizon. They submitted those letters because they also know that they need this type of infrastructure in this area to provide the service that they provide to their customers. There is a real need.
So you've gotten letters of support for the project, but not necessarily commitments to locate on it once it's complete.
Well, yes. But let me talk about that just for a moment. And the first thing I want to point out is we have in the past, and as recently as a project that we just built in the last few months, submitted the same type of documentation to support co-location in order to get the taller height, which has been approved by the planning staff. But to the extent that this body reviewing this de novo decides that is inadequate for whatever reason, we would hope that you would place a limitation on our application and require us only to go to the base height of 65 feet and prove up based on some specific objective criteria the additional 15 plus 15 feet by some other form of documentation. I guarantee you that if this structure is allowed to be built, there will be significant interest in co-location. There will be, over time, more users on the tower. I'm certain of that.
One more question to the chair. Actually, a couple more questions to the chair, if you don't mind. There's been some discussion of these Alaska Railroad sites, and specifically, I'm thinking not in the right-of-way. I mean, they have a lot of holdings out there. They have a gravel pit near there. In fact, there's a remote site to the southeast of your proposed site that looks like it might have a tower on it now. I mean, it's like a mile of dirt road with a little 50 by 50 gravel pad at the end of it. I guess what I'm wondering is just how much, in the interest of trying to preserve the view shed from this highway, how much time have you guys invested in talking to the railroad about, not necessarily trying to put one on a wood pole, I get that's inferior, but is there another spot you can put this tower that's going to be outside?
I appreciate you asking that question. We have devoted easily more than 100 hours to exploring all options. We approached every single private property owner in the area, and I have a list here. I mean, it's pretty short. Irina Shupalova, Henry Dominguez, John Bridges, Joe Malone, Scott Shelley, Bill Redmond, and then also the Alaska Railroad. We talked to every single one of those owners. And I'm not going to, unless you allow me to, I won't go through all the specific details, but each property either didn't have a commercial permitted non-residential use on it, or the property owner wasn't interested, or the property owner, in the case of the Alaska Wildlife Center, didn't think that we were offering them enough money, or in the case of the Alaska Railroad, we met with them several times. I met with them in person with Jim Kibitz and Michelle Schmidt. We sat in their offices and pulled out surveys and site plans and land documents in their conference table, and we looked at things very carefully. And we were not able to agree on a location that met their needs and ours. In addition to not being able to meet our needs, they also insisted that they wanted a 5-year lease term with 5-year lease renewals. That was a deal killer for us. These tower projects ultimately involve the investment of many hundreds of thousands of dollars, at least $350,000 or more just to get the tower built, and then the equipment installations can run hundreds of thousands of dollars as well. we can't budget that on a 5-year term. It doesn't work. So to have that that short of a term was a deal breaker. So yes, we worked really hard on this. We left no stone unturned.
Another question to the chair. So we see other cell phone tower cases here also. So I think we get enough information to be dangerous, but I'm certainly not educated on cell phone technology. But we were told when we were looking at some other recent cases that the dot radio technology was kind of the next step, right? So instead of having these big towers in our neighborhoods, we're all going to have a little thing hanging off of our house, or a light pole or whatever, and that would be sort of the next step, which seems to be contrary to what it is that you guys are trying to do, which is sort of a big, massive installation with bigger equipment, et cetera. Can you speak to that? I guess? Absolutely.
I'll start with this response, and that is that anything is possible with the right amount of money. So to explain why I say that, there are currently 3 technologies that are roughly available for outdoor propagation of wireless communications. There's your standard macro cell, which is what we're talking about. This is a tower or maybe a tall building serving as a tower with antennas outdoors that are trying to propagate to a significant radius, a big area at one time. The next step is something called outdoor DAS. It's a DAS, distributed antenna system. This is an interesting system which involves installing a whole bunch of small antennas and stringing all of those antennas in parallel together and then having one plug-in place for the carriers to plug in. That's a really cool option, and it does provide a lot of flexibility with installation and trying to hide the equipment and so on. It's extremely expensive, and it's just simply not economical for a place like Turnagain Arm, Girdwood area. If you want to go to Las Vegas or some other convention center or the Coors Stadium or someplace like that, the DAS technology works great because there's economic momentum around the location, and there's already infrastructure that they can integrate their stuff into. To do that in this area, we would nonetheless still have to come before the staff and ask to build 100 small towers or light poles or some type of structure because it doesn't exist there. So that's not real practical. If that's our option, it's not going to happen based on economics. And then the last option is small cell, where the carrier's bringing in one set of equipment just for them. And typically when small cell is done, it's done in urban environments, maybe to cover an intersection. It's a very small area. It's cost prohibitive. We have to operate within the confines of realities, both technical and economic, in today's world. What's going to happen 20 years from now? Who knows? If I knew that, well, I'd be doing something else right now, I guess. But right now, based on what we know, what the world looks like today, what's available for the telecommunication companies in order to do business and provide the service to the consumers, this is it. It needs to be a macro site.
Thank you.
Mr. Strike?
Yeah, this is a carryover from Commissioner Walker's question, and maybe I'll rephrase this. Why not co-locate on a current tower location that's already in place with a larger pole?
We have extensively studied through Verizon's RF team, their radio frequency propagation engineers, the entire area. We've mapped it in many different ways. And based on their needs and their own specific network plan, this was the optimal location. In other words, sure, maybe not that exact spot, but somewhere very close to the intersection of Portage Glacier Lake Road and Seward Highway for a few reasons.
But you mentioned optimal is a depending on the definition of optimal, because you've already characterized optimal being a financial consideration because of the lease cost associated at the railroad who wanted to charge you or offer a 5-year lease, which didn't fit your financial model. So optimal isn't always about technology. It's also, in your own words, a financial decision.
And a control issue. I mean, if you're suggesting that we go ahead and force ACS somehow to AWN to take ACS's old towers and rip them down, knock them down, and build a new tower on a site that we don't own or control or have the ability to make any decisions about, that's not really possible. They're a competitor to Verizon. I mean, that's like asking ABC Plumbing to consider doing business out of XYZ Plumbing House. It's not a reality.
But now you're arguing against co-locating, but you're asking them to do that with you.
Okay, so we have a unique situation here where Atlas Tower is independent from the carriers. The tower we are trying to build is made for co-location. When ACS built their wood poles all over this state, they had only one company in mind when they built their infrastructure, ACS. Same for GCI. That's why there's so many towers throughout the borough. ACS and GCI built competing structures all over the municipality. Atlas Tower wants to build a tower that has the structural capacity and the height to allow for co-location. So if we build it, you know, like the saying, they will come, because there doesn't exist a structure that will allow for co-location at this scale. It doesn't exist.
But you've got 2 letters, one from AT&T and one from Alaska Wireless, that says if you build it, they'll think about coming. So with that in mind, if they're willing to go and co-locate, it would seem like an ideal location would be to take one of their existing locations, build the taller tower, everybody wins.
That's not current.
He's testified that's not
He's contradicted. And I maintain he's contradicted in his testimony. And so I'm just trying to ferret out.
Let's move on.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else from the commission? Ms. McConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the chair, Mr. Powers, can you clarify for me, is the need for this tower driven more by the need to provide service along the Seward Highway, or is it driven more by the need to provide service within the Portage Valley area?
That's interesting. You're going to be annoyed with my answer, but I'm going to say both. The propagation studies that we did wanted to come up with the optimal location. I say we, it was Verizon. Their engineers did extensive propagation studies. Their goal was to connect the Seward Highway, which is necessarily impaired or whatever by steep topographic considerations to the north, but also the master plan would be to install some kind of infrastructure all the way east at the visitor center at the tunnel, and thereby efficiently covering the entire area. So the answer is both. Yeah.
So when you say that the propagation people have studied the entire area, can you tell us how far east you looked down Portage Glacier Valley Road?
Sure. We proposed, for instance, a site that's further east and south on Scott Shelley's property, and that was rejected emphatically by their engineers. That it didn't meet their goals and needs.
And I think there's a utility substation, something like a mile down the road east. Did you look at that site?
I'm honestly not sure. We've never been able to install on a location where there was high voltage power lines. It's just simply not typically done because of the safety and access issues that are necessarily raised by that type of land.
That's interesting, because we've seen that in other situations in the municipality.
And if I may ask a question, maybe that's not typical, but as I understand it, even though we've done an incredible amount of work studying all the alternate locations, I don't think we're actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we're required to prove that every other possible location didn't work.
Thank you.
Ms. Inglis?
Through the chair, Mr. Powers, after the commission in May, I believe it was, asked Atlas to go out and look for other locations, did you?
Absolutely.
And which ones did you look at?
We contacted various homeowners, landowners again, but it was a short list. Irina Shupilova's property doesn't have a permitted non-residential use. Mr. Tomingus became uninterested and didn't return calls. John Bridges' land is vacant, so that was not possible based on the requirement of permitted non-residential use. My notes for Joe Malone: multiple attempts to reach Mr. Malone, unsuccessful in connecting. RF rejected this location due to poor coverage. We spoke to Mr. Shelley. As you know, he provided a comment to the planning staff at one point, either in this hearing, in this application or the previous, saying that he was opposed to this project, but he wanted it on his own property, similar to Mr. Miller's situation with the Alaska Wildlife Center. And then Bill Redmond was involved in some kind of wetlands swap with another property, and he thought that would not allow him to move forward on a different business opportunity. And again, the Alaska Railroad, we were at a logjam over the lease term issue.
So on page 133 of the packet, you're saying that Mr. Shelley's property is not appropriate?
I'm saying that we proposed Mr. Shelley's property to our client, which is funny because it goes the other way normally, but we went back to them multiple times and said, I'm not sure what's going to happen here. Would you look at this property? And they did study it, and by studying it, they produced electronic three-dimensional maps of signal coverage and so on, and they rejected it.
Are you aware that Verizon has co-located or put towers on Chugach Electric substation properties around Anchorage?
Anything's possible, sure. I don't know all of Verizon's locations, but perhaps I'm not specifically aware of it, but it wouldn't surprise me if that's occurred.
Okay. And also, when you signed the lease with Mr. Choi, when was the lease actually assigned by the parties?
My apologies. I don't have that ground lease in front of me, but it's been quite a while. 2013, perhaps.
And did you talk to any other people before that? Or did you sign the lease first and then go out?
We were working on the same list of the very short list of property owners in the area. We were entered into some what I thought were going to be successful negotiations with the Alaska Wildlife Center. In fact, we had done a number of tower leases with other nonprofits in the past, including, for instance, the Sitka Raptor Center and other nonprofit organizations. And we were pretty excited about moving forward on their property. And Mr. Miller, through emails, indicated he was very excited about moving forward on the opportunity as well. So much so that he indicated to me that he would like to have it on his property as opposed to the center's property, so that he could maximize the amount of return to himself and his family as opposed to sharing that with the center. And then negotiations fell apart when he asked for an astronomical amount of money that wasn't economically feasible for us to provide him. Negotiations fell apart.
Okay, that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Spring, then Ms. Dean.
Yeah, just to follow up a little bit on the coverage issues, and two questions. One, what's the status of the coverage in Girdwood Valley itself? It didn't look like from the maps that you showed us that this is going to really have much impact there. Do they currently get good coverage there?
I know only anecdotally of what equipment's there. I personally haven't really studied that, but I do know that they have some equipment, I think, at Alyeska. and there is coverage in the area. I can't attest to its quality or bandwidth rate or download speeds or anything of any use to us for this discussion. There is coverage there, but it's limited, I think, in part just because of topography and not equipment. It's a really tough area to provide this kind of service to.
Second question, and I think I asked this last time we had a public hearing on this, but there's currently coverage you mentioned on the road and in the area of the proposed site. But it's, I'm assuming it's like the lower technology, so it basically covers cell phone operation, although there might be some droppage, but cell phone is available in that area because of the lower grade. What your proposal is, I'm assuming based on the higher technology, which allows data downloading primarily. So what you're saying is that the demand here that's going to be met is primarily for data downloading on the highway in Portage Valley, that there'll be cell phone coverage, but this will allow a greater intensity of data transmittal, like on my iPad or whatever.
The answer is a little bit more complex than that, because, or a little more complex than the dichotomy between voice and data, because what's happening is as these networks become more advanced, everything becomes data. For instance, if you're talking on Verizon in Alaska, your voice is data. They convert it to VoIP, and it goes through the data network through packets. It's not the old technology where it's voice. So there's kind of a gray area in there. But all of the networks, AWN is aggressively building out a pretty cool 4G LTE network for Alaskans. AT&T is doing the same, and obviously Verizon's done nothing but data. That they're not actually doing a voice network. That is the new technology. That's basically going to replace what's behind us. What's behind us is kind of like a house that's got half-inch plumbing. I think I used this analogy last time I came before you, but imagine you built a house for yourself as a bachelor and you plumbed it with half-inch copper lines. Everything works great. And then perhaps you get married and everything still works okay. Sometimes it takes a while to fill the tub. And then you have kids and suddenly it doesn't work. You don't have enough water pressure. You can't move the water through fast enough to serve all of the users. The analogy is apt here. The 2G and 3G technology is getting overloaded right now. It's only going to get worse. Every single day, there are more users, there's more devices, there's more demand for data. Data does float over or move through the 2G and 3G technology. It just doesn't work very well. And as that demand increases almost exponentially, the coverage is going to get worse as a result. It's sure to fail. That's why all three networks, or all three carriers, AT&T, AWN, and Verizon, are submitting so many applications to the staff. That's why they're doing it. They need more infrastructure to provide that new service. And they're not doing it just to make money. They're doing it to provide a service to the community. And quite frankly, the community is the driver because the consumers are demanding it. It's coming from the community. It's coming from your constituents. That's why this is happening.
Christine?
Through the chair, my question is regarding the height of the original height was 140 feet. Now we're down to 95 feet. I remember the maps before that
Yes.
were pretty extensive. How negatively impacted will you be going from 140 to 95?
It's a hard question for me to answer in words. Again, they did propagation studies at 140 feet, and with the goal of covering basically all of the Seward Highway and having a potential line of sight to the other end of the Turnagain Arm, to the tunnel. That was the height that we were told was required. But when confronted with the unfortunate reality that wasn't going to get approved, they said, okay, well, we will downgrade our our goals for this site and deal with, an integration with the existing rules. That's why we submitted a site plan review at the 65 feet with the 30 additional feet for co-location. That particular height isn't driven by necessarily a specific technical need. It's being driven by the rules. So we have to live within the code.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, we've got one more question, then we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back shortly. Ms. Ingalls, did you go out of the queue? Okay. We're going to take about a 10-minute recess, and then we'll come back right where we are right now.
Thank you.
Okay, we're back in session. Come on up. Well, I don't know whether they're going to need you or not, but come on up. We're having so much fun. Do we have any questions from staff? Seeing none in the queue, I have a question for staff. We've heard discussion about using one of the railroad gravel pits. And I have, since we've been told that we have a required permitted non-residential use, staff, permitted non-residential use, does a gravel pit qualify as a permitted non-residential use?
Mr. Chair, first of all, I'm not sure where the concept of the railroad gravel pit came from. I don't know if that came from something we said, but we were speaking of railroad right-of-way. But a gravel pit is a non-residential use. It is a natural resource extraction operation, which is listed as a conditional use in the R11 district. However, it has the potential to be problematic in this kind of situation because natural resource extraction is by its nature temporary. You extract all of the natural resources and then you're done. So by allowing a cell tower, which would likely last longer than a natural resource extraction operation, which is often permitted for 5, 10 years, to consider that then at some point you would have the cell tower, but you would no longer have the non-residential use. That would be something that would be a concern.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Walker.
Through the chair, my question is for the applicant. So this, just so I'm clear, I'm going to restate my understanding of the staff's position on the non-residential use at the proposed site, which is that there isn't currently a non-residential use there, but if we approve this case tonight, that the applicant would have to prove, before they can build the tower, they would have to prove that there is a non-residential, qualifying non-residential use on that site. Is that, I'm looking at the staff, so I guess my question is for the staff, and if the answer is yes, then my question for the applicant is, how are you going to do that?
Through the chair, Mr. Walker, on page 8, that was one of the department's recommendation in the event the Planning and Zoning Commission did overturn the director's decision or approve this appeal, that they would provide proof that the property is occupied by a permitted principal use. In this case, we're concerned that we might have an abandoned building just sitting out there that we don't know what kind of state of repair it might be in, and so we would want to know that a restaurant's there or something that's permitted in that district, so that we wouldn't end up in a situation where we've approved a tower and without a permitted non-residential use.
So through the chair, my question for the applicant is how do you intend to address that issue?
Certainly, and if I can provide a tiny bit of background on this issue, on May 1st, 2013, in an email exchange or a series of email exchanges with planning staff, specifically Erica, we confirmed that, in fact, at that time there was a permitted non-residential use, which was the Tidewater Cafe. That particular location, I think since the late 80s even, has been used as a restaurant at times throughout the year and at times as a seasonal use, which is quite common here in Anchorage in many places where you have a profitable season and then you have a period of time where things go dormant. I think, I know that after May 1st, 2013, I think in the summer of 2014, I know I'm on the record, so I want to just be clear that I'm not exactly sure of the precise dates, but the couple that was running the Tidewater Cafe as a restaurant completed a season, and at the end of the summer, they decided that they were going to do something different. And so the transition occurred so that cafe was then, the restaurant space was then leased to, I'm not exactly sure how this worked, but to allow for the Chugach Electric linesmen to utilize that as a kitchen and a resting place while they did their work on upgrading the power lines there. And currently I know that Brian Choi, owner of the property through the Universal Finance Company, is currently working on getting a new tenant to come back and restart that business this summer. It's something that's what that property's been used historically for, and right now the Chugach Electric folks are finished with using that and leasing it, I think, and it presumably will be leased out and continued to use as a permitted non-residential use. We have no reason to assume that wouldn't happen. It's been used as a restaurant for decades now, but as you know, as Anchorage residents, you know, things that happen seasonally have some starts and fits and stops and that sort of thing, and that's what we're seeing right now. Not sure what's going to happen next.
Any other questions from staff? You let me know when you're done.
Through the chair. So when it comes to this scenic highways issue, we have the 3 different designations. There doesn't appear to be any teeth in any one of those 3. So really, at this point, the buck stops with us, and it's up to us to decide and/or enforce whatever it is that we perceive to be enforceable there.
Yes, I agree.
Are you done, Mr. Walker? Mr. Spring?
Yeah, just a real follow-up on that question. Thanks for giving us the background on the scenic byway regulations. And when I read that, it appears that there was a requirement for designation that they submit a corridor management plan. And it states in the regs, yet there's no indication that anybody was able to find that, or there's nothing in the packet. I'm just curious why there isn't. I mean, there seems like there has to be one, and I'd like to look at it. Not that I understand that there's no teeth in the requirement, but it's supposed to provide guidance to localities and jurisdictions regarding land use and other issues along the corridor. Don't know why it's not available. There has to be one.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, there is a DOT site that shows all of the scenic highways within the state of Alaska and lists their approved plans, and the 3 plans that we mentioned in the staff report were the only ones that were listed for the this portion of the Seward Highway. I do recall one of them was created, I think, as part of, and I apologize, I don't exactly remember which one. I think it might have been the 1998 plan. The partnership plan was created as part of the application to become the designated scenic or become part of the designated scenic byway program. But I can't explain why there has been no management plan. There's nobody who seems to be able to provide us a great deal of information. I mean, the information we provided to you is just a bunch of searching on the web and reading, and but nobody at DOT has been helpful in this particular issue.
I have no other questions in the queue, so Mr. Powers, you may sit down with the satisfaction knowing that this is the longest applicant rebuttal we've had in a year and a half. So thank you very much for your time.
I appreciate your time and the fact that you listened. Thank you.
Okay. We will now open it up for a public hearing. Anyone else that wants to testify, please come forward and state your name.
My name's, can you hear me? My name is Mike Miller. I'm past president of Portage Valley Community Council. I'm the founder of the Alaska Wildlife Conservation Center, and I'm on the Alaska Wood Bison Recovery team.
Are you speaking for the community council, or are you speaking as an individual?
There's only 8 of us that live down there. I don't think it's, the community council only meets every couple of years. I'm speaking for myself.
Thank you.
And I appreciate Mr. Powers' concerns, or Atlas's concerns about economic development in the Portage Valley. I think he gave you answers that he wanted you to hear. I have some discrepancies with some of those. I know some landowners down there. Rex Turner owns property, Turner Fine Homes from the valley. He wasn't approached. Robert Hall. There's more private property that needs to be looked at. This whole thing boils down to Atlas wants to make money. We want to preserve the scenic beauty, and we want to have better cell coverage. And we could do all that if we would just take the other different location. Mr. Walker mentioned the Alaskum abandoned site behind there. That's an ideal spot. It's right close to the Tidewater Cafe, but it's not looking right down the barrel. When you come down the Portage Highway, you're looking at this proposed tower for miles, all the way from 20 Mile straight down the barrel. Coming down Portage Road, you're looking at it. Coming back from Kenai, you're looking at it. They couldn't have picked a worse spot. It is a good project. We would like to have better coverage down there, but not in that location at that cost of the scenic value. He said, well, there's already unsightly telephone poles in the area, but those unsightly telephone poles are way off out of the right-of-way. It's not, again, right there at the epicenter of the Portage Valley. Throwing an earthquake word. I think that if Mr. Powers would talk to me, when this body denies this tonight, Atlas isn't going away. They'll go to a different spot. This is the best, most economic spot for their business. And when it is denied, they'll take one of these other spots that we've hinted about tonight that are as equally as good. It might cost Atlas a little bit more money because they've gone through this whole process, but it satisfies all needs. At the end of the railroad, there are some towers there now. I don't know who owns them, and I don't know the specifics, but they're steel, and they're there, and there's private property adjacent to that on the other side of the tracks, which I mentioned to Mr. Powers, but it would take some expense to put a road into it and to run utilities to. But there would still be profit for Atlas Towers. You know, all needs can be satisfied. I think that the cell coverage down there works good now. I don't know what benefit it would be with this improved tower, but I don't think it would be worth the cost of the loss of the scenic value of this area. Portage isn't going to develop in that area. We don't have to worry about the community development and the economic development. It's all Forest Service property except for these couple little parcels. The Begich Bog Visitor Center's mandated to shut down because of budget cuts. And I think that it's, for locally, there's not that much need to do.
Mr. Miller, can you summarize, please?
Sure. I'm coming before you people next month. We on Wildlife Center concerns through planning and zoning. And if you allow me to talk to Mr. Powers and pick another location, I think he would be pleased, you guys would be pleased, and I'll give you that promise to you guys next month. You can ask me how it all turned out, but I think we can solve this all ourselves by just going to a different location. I don't think there's any controversy. I just think that these other sites are way more suitable, and without a loss of value that we all don't want to agree to, that loss of value is way too much.
Thank you very much. We have some questions in the queue. Ms. Inglis?
Through the chair, I have a question. You mentioned the previous Alascom site. Where was that at?
It's right behind the Tidewater Cafe, and it's right past the railroad going up the Portage Valley Road. Alascom put utilities and put a road all the way out there and used, wetland permits for a purpose, but they haven't been used for a long time. I think Mr. Walker saw it on a map.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And that's an ideal spot, too. And I know Mr. Powers said that other places like Shelley's and stuff isn't the sweet spot, but the whole area is flat. I can't imagine that moving a tower over 50 feet would take you out of that sweet spot. The whole valley's sweet. It can be put anywhere down there. I just logically thinking it'd have to be that way. The Tidewater Cafe is affordable, but I know for a fact, because it's at the end of my driveway, it's been abandoned. There's nobody living there. Alascom used Rex Turner's property across the river, not Alascom, Alcan Electric, when they did that high wire thing up to Turnagain Arm, but they weren't across the road. I didn't see them there. I haven't seen any activity there for years. Nobody coming in or going out. It's abandoned.
Mr. Walker?
So I'm kind of piecing some of this together, but I see you made a comment on today, actually. So you are the founder of the Wildlife Center down there, and do you also currently own that property?
It's a nonprofit.
Okay.
The property was homesteaded by Robert Moore, and back in who knows where, a guy from Seward, passed ownership a couple times. When I found the property 23 years ago, it was in litigation down in L.A., and I leased it for a year and a half, and I got all the permits through Public Works. I wanted to see if I could get the permits to do what I wanted to do. And 10 years after running the business, struggling, because everybody that saw us building down there thought for sure that wasn't going to ever be successful or make it. We're still there. But 10 years ago, we became a nonprofit, all set up through 4-Acre. All our accountants are through 4-Acre. And after 10 years now, the Wildlife Center, the nonprofit, has taken the option, we've had it appraised, to have the property purchased from the for-profit that started it. The nonprofit's buying the property now. Those 18 letters that came through today, I don't know who they were from, but I heard they were supportive of what I'm saying tonight, and I hope everybody read those.
So I want to clarify. So Mr. Powers had said something about negotiating with the owner of the property where the Wildlife Center is located, and I was just, is that you or is that someone else?
No, there's a corporation called Sourdough Development Services that started the Wildlife Center, and it's a typical way that any business typical of the Wildlife Center has to start as a for-profit and then go become a non-profit. Dennis McMillan uses it in his talks all the time on the transition because he's helped set the whole thing up. But if you ask me 2 months from now, the property will be owned by the Alaska Wildlife Conservation Center, the nonprofit.
So I guess I'm still unclear on who owns it, but regardless, you would have knowledge of there was a negotiation between Atlas Tower and the owner of that property, is that correct?
Right.
Okay, and that negotiation hidden and passed because of economic terms?
No, Mr. Powers stated that when he approached me to talk to me about the tower, of course I had no knowledge of how big it was and what it was going to do and all this, and so I spoke to the man. And after I got the information, I presented it to the board, and the board denied it because of the aesthetic values of the thing.
So there's no alternative to put it there, obviously.
No, there's nowhere on our property that we would want to put it. If we're not profit driven, we're a nonprofit, and we just if we had a place to work it out and it wouldn't interfere with the aesthetics, we would come to him, because the money that we would get from Atlas would benefit the Wildlife Center and its mission statement, but we just can't get past the aesthetic thing. And I would just encourage everybody to look at the alternate sites, and I think if you do deny it tonight, Atlas will go to one of those alternate sites and we'll all be happy. There's no losers here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. You may have a seat. Okay, there's one person left in the audience. Do you wish to testify? Okay. Seeing nobody in the queue or no one in line, anyone else wish to testify? Anyone else at all? I'll close the public testimony on case 2014-0222. Public testimony is now closed. Okay, Commission. Ball is now in our court. Mr. Walker.
So I think my biggest concern, and Mr. Chair, if you think we should adjourn to a committee of the whole, let me know, but my biggest concern is this view shed issue with these various scenic highway, byway designations, and I guess I'd like to explore that for a second and see what everybody's thinking.
Well, I've been told we need to have a motion on the floor before we go to committee of the whole. We don't have a motion on the floor, so well, maybe we do. Mr. Strike.
Well, we have a couple options here before us, and as far as motions, I'm going to take the reverse. In the case of 2014-0222, I move to deny the appeal of case 2014-0180 and uphold the administrative official's denial of the site plan review.
You left one word out. You moved to deny the appeal. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. All right. Do we have a second? Mr. Spring, we have a motion. We have a second. We could go to the committee of the whole, or we could continue as we are. Mr. Strike, it's your motion. Would you care to speak to it? Then I'll go to Mr. Spring, and then we'll open it up.
I will be supporting that motion, and primarily it is the view shed. And secondly, I do find that the administrative official's findings are appropriate, but also in that the Turnagain plan is to preserve the scenic quality and natural environment of the open space. This doesn't do it, and I think as we've heard testimony, this is looking right down the barrel, and I'm going to paraphrase, this is looking right down the barrel of a shotgun as you're going south and as you're going east on the highway at this location.
Mr. Spring, do you care to speak?
Well, I'll be supporting the motion. In my opinion, most land use issues are a trade-off, a balancing act, and I think that's what the Commission tries to do in the majority of cases. In this case, it seems obvious that this 95-foot cell tower, even though it's lower than the 140-foot, is still going to have an impact on the view shed of the drive down the scenic highway. And so my questioning evolved around the need. I mean, how much is the need? I mean, is it the need so severe that we can detract from what's one of the goals, primary goals in the Turnagain Arm plan? In my opinion, and not being a cell phone specialist, there seems to be service along the highway there, at least cell phone service. And my biggest priority concern would be if you couldn't do emergency calls from there if there's an accident. But it seems as if the lower technology provides cell phone service. I'm not sure that we need to have high-speed data service in pristine wilderness areas. I mean, well, Portage Valley, if that's pristine wilderness. I mean, the experience you want to achieve there is not necessarily to use your iPad or a computer to download website information. And, you know, on the other hand, there might be other opportunities to put a cell tower in there that wouldn't detract so much from it. So I don't want to risk, though, the view shed and the experience of driving down the highway just to maybe allow them, Atlas Tower, to develop a site that's the most economic for them, when there might be other sites available, and when there may not, in my opinion, be a critical need to download data along your drive along the Seward Highway.
Thank you very much. You done, Mr. Walker, or were you, I think you were finished earlier, is that, or do you? Ms. Dean, then Mr. Robinson.
Through the chair, I am going to stay with my original from last May, which was to vote to approve at 140 feet. It's now 95 feet. I believe the petitioner has made quite a lot of effort to make this work. I don't think that the petitioner has been treated very fairly. I think that they are getting hit as a moving target. Each time they've brought this forward, the city comes up with new things that they didn't bring up before, and now we have a whole, provide proof that the property is occupied by a permitted principal use in accordance with AMC 21.40.117B.5. I just think that that is amazing to pull that out at this late date as a reason to deny. And I do not think the applicant should be denied. I think that, yes, as we're driving in our cars, we have no effect on whether we're downloading a movie or not. But there are plenty of businesses in that area that utilize this technology that is necessary for them. So, to say, gee, when I'm driving through, I don't need it, so therefore it's not necessary, is not a fair statement. So I will not be supporting this motion. I will, given the opportunity, not uphold the director's decision, and I would approve their appeal.
Mr. Robinson and Mr. Spory.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be supporting the motion. I concur with the petitioner's comments that there are other elements in the Turner-Gannard Comprehensive Plan having to do with economic development. That said, I don't think the action here this evening by this commission, if we vote in favor of this motion, is a denial of all cell towers in the valley. It's a denial of a cell tower at that specific location. We have a packet here from people that live in Girdwood and Portage that basically echo that effect, that they're not opposed to towers, but at that location it is problematic. I think the petitioner's own comments was, and this is somewhat questionable, that he didn't have to prove that every location didn't work. That said, I don't think that his search has been exhaustive enough. I think I've heard testimony here tonight that there are potential other locations, and I haven't heard definitively that those locations are not adequate.
I will be not supporting the motion, and I'm driven mostly by the fact that first time this came before us, staff approved it, made a recommendation for approval, and the fact that it's a moving target bothers me. I don't believe it is incumbent upon us to require the applicants to state that they've exhaustively researched every other possible location. We seem to do that on towers only, and I don't think that's necessarily correct. I think that should be looking at one location only, and that's this one. I really wish it didn't impact the view shed, but I think like a lot of things, the first time we see it will be impacted. The 10th time we see it, we'll look right past it. So anyway, I will not be supporting the motion. Mr. Spories.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will not be supporting the motion. I echo the thoughts of both Ms. Dean and yourself. And as the petitioner said, that even though it is data, that Verizon is actually just doing all of their voice over VoIP, which is data, and I think there's a need for it.
Any other comments on the motion? Mr. Strike, could you restate your motion for the record, please?
In case 2014-0222, I move to deny the appeal of case 2014-0180 and uphold the administrative official's denial of the site plan review.
Okay. Seeing no one in the queue, may we please use our machines? The motion has passed 5-4. I was snickering because at one point somebody hadn't voted and we were 4-4 is what I was snickering on. So the motion as stated by Mr. Strike has prevailed. The appeal is denied, and that is where we are. Anyone have any findings they want to have that they have not stated earlier? Good. Any findings at all? Seeing and hearing none, we will now take up case 2015-001, an ordinance amending the new title 21, section 2108 something. Give us a minute to get organized on that, please. Hey, gentlemen. Thank you for sitting down, Mr. Powers. I appreciate that. Why don't you leave him an opportunity to let him leave, and then you can get up and leave. The next case is case 2015-0010, an ordinance amending new title 21. Do we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an ordinance that makes an amendment to Title 21, Chapter 8, Section 050I, which is about street lighting. You may recall that last year, after the Golden View Drive reconstruction project was brought forward, there was a proposed amendment to prohibit continuous lighting along rural collectors. And the Planning and Zoning Commission supported that amendment, and the Assembly passed that amendment in code, although they did end up providing 6 situations in which lighting may be considered, which these were done through a substitute ordinance on the floor at the Assembly and was not presented to the Commission. The Golden View project is still being finalized, and the community, after learning that the changes to Golden View Drive would not allow children to walk to that school, requested that since continuous lighting would lower the point score from a hazardous route to a non-hazardous route for Golden View Drive, they requested that continuous lighting be allowed along that rural collector so that their children could walk to school from the area. So Assemblymember Johnston has put forward an amendment to this section of code for street lighting that would allow continuous lighting to be used. It adds a 7th criteria for when continuous lighting may be considered, and that would be when the additional lighting would allow the roadway to meet the Anchorage School District criteria for classification as a non-hazardous walking route to school. So you'll see on page 5 of your packet, Assemblymember Johnston's assembly memorandum explaining why she brought this forward. We tried to provide you with some information about the Anchorage School District's process for looking at walking routes and designating walking routes as hazardous, and the 2 checklists on pages 10 and 11 that they use when they're evaluating a particular route. The department has no objection to this amendment. No agencies provided any objection if they responded, and the Airport Heights Community Council indicated that they support the amendment. Thank you.
This is a public hearing. I see that the room is vacant except for a few people from the prior case. Anyone wish to testify? Anyone wish to testify at all? Would the record show that there was no one to testify on this case? We have some questions in staff, or from Commission for the staff. Ms. Dean and Mr. Robinson.
Through the chair, could you tell us, I know this is directed at one road for one situation. Because it's written the way it is, could it potentially bleed over all over rural Anchorage?
Yes.
Through the chair, Ms. Dean, it could certainly apply to other situations. I did hear through, I guess what I would call back channels. I didn't see any formal comments, but I did hear that there were some concerns from the Chugach Eagle River community. And we did do an evaluation of schools in the Chugach Eagle River area, and we learned that there are only 2 schools in the entire Chugach Eagle River community that are located on rural collectors. Those schools are Chugach High School and Mirror Lake Middle School. All of the other schools in the Chugach Eagle River area are located either on arterials, urban collectors, or local streets. We did not do that same analysis of the Anchorage Bowl.
Could you, excuse me, could you tell me then on this regarding schools, how many miles from the school on that collector would be required for lighting?
So my understanding is that the school district allows walking up to 1.5 miles from the school. So I think that would be the maximum limitation. Although I would note in the Golden View situation, if you head south, there's 1.5 miles that you could get to without hitting a major intersection. But if you head north, you hit Rabbit Creek Road, which is not considered a safe crossing. And so should the traffic engineer determine that continuous lighting could be put in to make this a non-hazardous walking route, it would stop at Rabbit Creek Road, because it wouldn't fix the hazardness, I don't know if that's a word, but the hazard situation at that intersection. So this exception does not necessarily say that any school that's on a rural collector is going to end up with continuous lighting 1.5 miles in each direction. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Thank you.
Mr. Robinson?
Thank you. Question in the same vein. So the limiter to not exceed that, what you just said is that it wouldn't necessarily go up to 1.5 miles. The limiter for it not exceeding 1.5 miles is that's how the Anchorage School District defines its walking route to school?
Yes.
In what, some kind of policy document, or?
Yes. And I can't remember if that came out of this document I have provided to you. If you can give me a second, I will look.
you think there would be any objection to clarifying as a non-hazardous walking route to school for a maximum of 1.5 miles from the school?
It's Anchorage School District criteria for the non-hazardous walking routes. I found it online. Okay, it's quite a document.
I bet you're comfortable with that, aren't you?
Also, I expect Mr. Ferguson's document is more thorough, but if you look at page 8 of your staff packet, at the very top when it's talking about acceptable walking routes, internal residential streets, most schools in an urban setting and some in a rural setting are surrounded by or have adjacent to them a residential area that presents a walking situation up to 1.5 miles. Personally, I have no objection to that amendment. I think that is the intent of the entire situation. I couldn't tell you what Assemblymember Johnston might think.
Thank you.
Mr. Kange and then Ms. Barker.
Thank you, through the chair. I guess my question also would relate to the proposed renovations to Golden View, and I know that it's proposed to have a bike path on one side, so I'm kind of curious if this lighting is proposed to go in prior to that to light the street, or will we just light the street and then redo the road and then have this bike path, which in my opinion is safe for kids to walk to school down Golden View?
Through the chair, Mr. Kange, my understanding is that all of these things would happen together. The bike path and the lighting and the reconstruction of the road would all happen as part of one project, so there wouldn't be one coming ahead of the other. Although it is also my understanding that the continuous lighting would only be considered when it would kick a situation from hazardous to non-hazardous. So if you had a situation where, I think, I forget the exact points, but I think maybe you need 45 points to be non-hazardous, and bad things give you more points. So if your score is 80 points and putting in lighting gets to take off 10 points and it would take you from 80 down to 70, well, that doesn't get you down to 45 to be non-hazardous, so they wouldn't consider it.
Okay, so in this case, is it your professional opinion that that sidewalk, having the lights may not mitigate that, having that sidewalk to give it enough points? Or maybe the reverse of that?
It is my understanding that adding the pedestrian facilities removes a number of points from the score. You want a low score. So adding the pedestrian facilities removes points, but not enough to get it below the hazardous line. But above that, adding lighting, continuous lighting, kicks it under that score. That's my understanding.
Ms. Barker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my understanding that the school district municipality participates in the Safe Routes to School program, which kind of sets some of these standards. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, Ms. Barker.
So that we're not pulling this out of the air. There are some standards. The kind of question I have is there an opportunity to provide pedestrian level lighting that would not have the same negative impact that people in rural areas might consider would be a result of what we call roadway lighting? Has that been considered?
Through the chair, Ms. Barker, I don't know. I think one of the things about roadway lighting is that it lights intersections where you may see crossings, and pedestrian scale lighting may not do that, but I'm not aware that it's been discussed.
I'm just throwing that out there because I've been to other communities where they do this, and it's kind of a in-between scale. It manages to light the intersection, provide safe passage for pedestrians without obscuring the night sky, if you will.
I would like to remind the commission that a year ago, Golden View came up here and we tried to reduce the lighting from a runway level lighting to reasonable. In the And that's honestly, in the traffic department did not like our recommendation, and they came back with the conclusion that every driveway was an intersection, and so they increased the number of lights, and we had to modify our resolution to make it clear that a driveway was not an intersection. And that's what Ms. McConnell was commenting on. There's a lot of history and blood on this one coming before us. Anyone have any further questions for staff? Then we could use a motion. We could use a motion to approve. Mr. Robinson.
In the matter of case 2015-0010, an ordinance amending new Title 21 to provide for the addition of roadway lighting in rural zones defined as Class B improvement areas to sufficiently meet Anchorage School District criteria for classification of non-hazardous walking routes to school. I move that we recommend to the Assembly approval as written by staff, with one addition to include 7 areas. The addition is up to a maximum of 1.5 miles from schools that may require additional roadway lighting to sufficiently ...
That is seconded by Mr. Walker. Thank you very much. I have an amendment to that motion I would like to make. I'd like to make amendment on line 25 of the ordinance, where it says comply with standards contained in the design criteria manual. I'd like to add the words unless revised by the Planning and Zoning Commission to give us the protection we need. I'll make that motion. I have a second on that from Mr. Sporhees. On that. Do you object to that motion, Mr. Robinson?
Oh, I do not.
Okay. Okay. Do you? I guess we'll vote. Can I combine the two?
I would prefer not.
Okay. All righty. Mr. Spring, you're in the queue.
Just a minute. I would prefer to split the vote.
Okay. All righty. Fine. On the motion to add the words unless modified by the Planning and Zoning Commission to line 24, we have a motion. Please use your machines. That motion carries 8-1. Mr. Tyler, or Mr. Robinson, you had a motion to approve. It was seconded by Mr. Walker, I believe. Do we have any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, please use your machines. Machines thinking. That motion passed unanimously. Mr. Robinson, do you have any findings?
I'd simply add that, as stated by the chair, this has been the example of a specific road in this case is a sensitive one, but I think the intent to provide some safe passage for pedestrians in the immediate vicinity of the schools is a reasonable one.
Okay. Thank you very much. Before we adjourn, Ms. McConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have actually 4 things to mention to you. One is that your calendar indicates that there are no cases on the April 13th meeting, but that is no longer the case. So please do not count on not having a meeting, because there will be a meeting. The second thing is that I've been requested to remind you that your APOC filings are due on the 15th. Please file them and provide a copy to the clerk's office. The third
On APOC, I ran into an issue this weekend. If you've got a joint account between you and your spouse, and you're trying to enter it as a joint account like we've been able to do in the past, you hit filer and spouse. That's not working. and you hit filer, and then you hit spouse, and filer disappears and spouse shows up. I called APOC today, talked to Michael. He says, yeah, I know we got a problem. He says, just go ahead and list everything as a filer. And I said, I thought they should correct me. He says, we don't have time. Really irked me. Anyway, go ahead, Ms. McConnell. You got to print out the whole thing. You got to file. You got to complete it. You got to sign it electronically. Okay. No, there's a. You go to copy your last year's form. Go copy it, then open your new one, and it will be there. And it makes life a lot easier. Okay, you go to the screen and it will say 2014, Greg Strike, copy, review, new, or something else, hit copy. And then go to open your 2015 filing and it will be there. It will be all there. Cut your time in half.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to briefly tell you about the Nixle cards that I left on your in front of your spaces, but perhaps I can do that at the directors meeting on Thursday. And for those of you who can't make it, I'd be happy to just send out an email about it to save time tonight, if that's acceptable. And then the last thing is I wanted to give you an update on appeals. The Board of Adjustment considered the Nordstrom Rack appeal a week or two ago, and they upheld the board's actions. They did, however, make some clarifications to the resolution, so I do have copies of the finding and decision of the Board of Adjustment, including the amended resolution for all of you, which I will pass out. The Board of Adjustment will be taking on the appeal of the GCI Tower in South Addition at the beginning of April, and I am sad to report that the South High School case has been appealed, so we'll be putting the record together for that.
Some of these cases, do they ever go away?
Eventually.
Question.
What was the appeal in the Nordstrom Rack?
There was an allegation that it was improperly processed and that it should have been a public hearing. And then there was an allegation that the two main allegations, there were a couple other minor ones, but the second main allegation was that the business should have been required to have an internal entrance to the mall area.
So it was an appeal from, not from the applicant, but from somebody else?
Correct. It was from about 6 business owners in the Sears Mall.
All right, Mr. Spring.
Yeah, yes, you, the chair requested that I follow the AMATS
Okay.
issue, and there's was some concern, I think, expressed by yourself, that they went ahead and proposed operating agreement changes and bylaw changes ahead of the actual citizen participation plan. I understand that, though, the AMATS coordinator is agreed to present the operating agreement and bylaws to the commission in April, I believe, one of the meetings. The bylaws are important to include because that tells what the new Citizen Advisory Commission is going to be consisted of, how they're going to nominate them and select them. So we need to do both operating and bylaws.
I am actively doing what I can to keep that from happening. Yeah, okay, on that one. With the elections, this would be a good opportunity for everybody to look at their committee assignments and tell me if they want to continue their committee assignments, change their committee assignments. If there's committees out there that we don't need any longer, let's get rid of them. If there are committees that we need that we don't have, let's consider them. So here's an opportunity we have to go back and look at that and try to get that to happen. If nobody has anything else to come before the body, I have a motion to adjourn, and it's been seconded, so we're adjourned. Drive carefully, people.